information for all three of us. And the elementary folks will be sending me their responses that we ask for a little bit later, and the middle and high school people will be sending their information to Judy. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit more about science inquiry specifically in the classroom. So if we'll go to the next one, there are three types of inquiry ordinarily, and if most of you probably do not teach 4-year-olds, we start at 3rd grade with science fair and go 3rd through 12th. So I'm guessing most of even the elementary teachers are grades 3, 4, 5. But if you are familiar with 4-year-old curriculum, they have sand and water tables and things like that. And there are a lot of activities that 4-year-olds do in a preschool program that are considered open inquiry. And the open inquiry, the children you have certain materials there, but the children choose the question that they're trying to solve in their minds, and they have to figure out how to explore and answer the question. And that's pretty open. Typically in school, we don't have a lot of open inquiry, but science fair is open inquiry, where the student chooses a question and also a method of answering the question, whether it's an engineering type project or a science project. And Judy's going to get more into the topic, choosing a topic. And later in the workshop, we're going to talk about how to develop a plan to find the answer to your question or problem. So we'll be doing that and addressing the open inquiry part. But let's go to the next slide. Much of what we have in school is structured inquiry. I remember when I was the coordinator for Wake County Schools, I worked with the groups of teachers. I worked with all the chemistry teachers as a group and all the physics and all the elementary by grade level and so on. And I remember some of our discussions with the chemistry teachers. They had a lot of labs that they did with their classes where they had all the steps already down. Follow this step, and you went through all the steps and everybody came up with an answer that was very similar. Wasn't exactly the same, but very similar. And that was structured inquiry. The teacher gave the students the question they were trying to solve or answer, and also the method and all the steps for finding the answer. In elementary school and middle school, I refer to those type labs as cookbook labs. Students follow the directions and they get a similar answer. A lot can be said for students to be able to follow directions. We like for them to be able to do that. But personally, I think we do probably too much that's structured in school as far as labs are concerned, whereas we could do more of the next kind of inquiry, which is the guided inquiry. And in the guided inquiry, the teacher does choose the question, but the students design a way to answer the question or solve the problem. And I know as teachers, we're limited by the materials that we have and the time that we have and the expense of those materials and how safe they are and all those other factors we have to weigh. So it's okay for us to choose the question. It's probably nice to develop the question along with the students. You know where you want to go, but you can steer the students that way with your questions to get them to focus on a question you'd like to solve. And you can then say, I have these materials and I want you to figure out how to solve the problem. We can't teach everything that we teach that way. There might not be a time, even in 180 school days, but we should do probably more instances where we let them decide how to solve the problem. Because otherwise, we're kind of spoon feeding the students and giving them the instructions, and they never really learn how to solve a problem on their own. And there are many skills that they don't develop fully because we've led them through the steps, and sometimes they don't even question why they're doing it, but they should. Why are we doing it this way when we could do it that way? And so they need to know how to control variables and design it. And you're going to be doing that in the workshop. You'll be designing. We won't do a lot of labs. We can't with the time we have, and it's all virtual. But we're going to try to do a lab with you this week, between now and next week, where you do design a way to answer the question, and then you do answer the question. So we'll see how that goes. We are limited, and I know when you go back to school, a lot of you are going to be teaching virtually some. And if the students don't have the materials, that makes it very difficult to do certain labs. But when they do have the materials, you can do a lab even virtually, and that's what we're going to try to demonstrate here today and next week and in between, how to do a virtual lab with your students. So you see on the slide, there are lots of kinds of paper towels. And when I start this activity with students, even face to face, I'll mention to them, think about the paper towels at your house if you have them. I know a lot of students that I taught didn't have paper towels at their house, but if someone were to buy paper towels at your house, they usually have some criteria that they use for which kind of towel they buy. And I usually ask the students that, I'd like for you on the chat right now, tell me a reason that you would choose one kind of paper towel over another paper towel. So there are about 17 of you out there. Let's see if I can hear some of the reasons you'd choose one towel brand over another towel brand. Yeah, select the size and price. We're getting some good ones. Effectiveness. And we'd probably have to define what does that mean. Cost and the ply. Got a lot of them coming up now. It doesn't rip too easily. Number of sheets, size for the money. Size for the money is a good one. Others. Any others? Thank you for doing that. We got a lot of good chats there, good input for characteristics. Now, ordinarily, when I ask the students that question, they don't come up with price very soon. When I ask college students and they're buying their own paper towels, they come up with price very quickly. And adults, teachers are going to come up with price very quickly. Students come up with a full range of things just like you did. They don't necessarily get into size for the quality or quality or effectiveness, but they do sometimes say, well, they pick a good color or something that matches the kitchen. And they even tell me sometimes that they have paper towels that they use every day at the house, but when company comes, they pull out the good paper towels, or the pretty ones or whatever. But they do get into absorbency. They watch television and commercials, and somebody will mention absorbency. Now, with children, I might ask somebody who comes up with it, tell me what you mean by absorbency. And they usually will say something like, well, it's the amount of liquid the towel will soak up. And so I say to them, okay, so you're telling me that if a towel is very absorbent, it will soak up a lot of liquid? And they say yes. Okay, so the question we're going to do today, we're going to pursue absorbency. And I know I got pictures here. You can see Viva. I'm going to come back to Viva later specifically. And a lot of students will mention Bounty and some of these other brands you see here. But we'll come back to that later. Don't let me forget to mention Viva, Judy. If you go to the next slide, the question I want to pursue today is I want to ask you, how much water will one towel of each type hold? Now, when I do this lab face-to-face, I would give you 3 types. And so the question would be, how much water will one towel of each type hold? And you're holding one towel of 3 different types. I ordinarily divide the students into groups of 3. And if I have left over, I don't want 1 left over. If 2 are left over, that's fine. A group of 2 is okay. But if I have 1 left over, I'd have a couple groups of 2 in that case. I don't want anybody working alone. So they'd mostly be in 3s and there'd be a group or 2 of 2s. And I would give each group 3 types of towels. Sometimes I give them 4 types. I'll give them the school brand, the ones that are on state contract, which are kind of funny because we know those aren't very absorbent and they fall apart. So anyway, and you'll see the other materials they have in just a few minutes. But they have to come up with a plan for how they're going to find out how much water one paper towel will hold. Now, since you're at home, we're somewhat limited to if you have towels, to the kind you have. I will say this, if you have select a size, I ordinarily hand out 3 regularly sized towels, and I don't like to use the select a size because they're so different in size that the students can't get over the size difference. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you use select a size at home, if that's what you have, let's consider 2 of those together, 1 regular towel. So for the purposes of this lab today, if you have select a size, you're going to tear off 2 of those, and that's what you're going to use. And you probably only have 1 kind of towel at home. Now, as we do this lab and you're at home, if you want to test some other types, you might ask your neighbors to leave 1 on the back porch so you can go grab it and test it on each side. You might get 3 kinds of towels That would be nice if you could. I don't recommend that you go buy three types because you're only going to use maybe one towel of each type for this, unless you do something, you want to repeat the experiment or do some verification, or some replication, or you make a mistake, you want to go back and change something. So ordinarily you'll use one. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And what we're going to ask you to do is, by next week, we want you to design an experiment to answer that question. So you're going to, in a minute, I'm going to tell you the materials you can use, and you'll have a paper towel type that you have, or some you've borrowed from neighbors, and you're going to design an experiment. You're going to use those suggested materials, and we're going to ask you to be precise, and I need to mention that because you're probably not going to have graduated cylinders. If you were at school, you might have graduated cylinders and you could measure the amounts of liquids precisely, but you might be at home and you might be using teaspoons and tablespoons, or even a measuring spoon set. And since I want you to be precise, if you're going to put a teaspoon of water in somewhere in a cup or something, I want you to get water in that teaspoon and then wipe across the top of it with a ruler or something flat, so you get a nice level teaspoon of water, or a tablespoon. So we want to be precise as we can. Now, we also want you to share your data before next week with us. You'll tell us your plan, which would be your research method, and you're going to tell us your findings. So you're going to send that information to either Judy or me, and you're going to be prepared to share that if we call on you with the class, with the whole class next week. So remember, you'll send elementary people, will send things to me, middle and high to Judy. Now, I'm going to explain something, the difference between face-to-face and virtual. If I were in a face-to-face class and I have my students at this point, they haven't started with the materials yet, they're not wetting any towels, they're looking at the materials, and I'm divided the group into, maybe there's a material manager that's going to come get the materials they need and take them back to the group, and they're going to return them later. There's going to be a person who's going to maybe do the measuring, or they might be the person actually doing the hands-on part of the lab, or they can take turns doing it, but they got to do everything the same. But one of them is going to be the data manager, and they're going to collect the data for the group. And if they have a third person, that could be the reporter for the group. So anyway, you just establish the jobs. But when I usually go around to each group quickly as they're coming up with their problem, and I ask them to tell me what they're doing. And what I try not to do with the groups in the face-to-face is I do my best to try to avoid telling them what not to do or what to do. If they're doing something I think that maybe they should not do, I might ask them questions to get them to see that they shouldn't be doing it, or they should be doing something else. It's a little harder with virtual because I think people get at home, they start thinking of things they want to do, and they might deviate from the plan a little. And so I do want to tell you about some things that come up in the face-to-face class that I usually ask them questions to get them to change what they're doing. And there are about 3 or 4 of these things. One I'll mention, sometimes the students will want to wet the towel, dip it in the water. They got a source of water that they've measured, and they want to dip it in the water and time and measure how far the water goes up the towel in a certain amount of time. Well, that's not the question we're looking at. We're not looking at how fast the towel will absorb water. And ordinarily, teams who want to do that don't end up wetting the whole towel. They might wait 10 minutes and the towel's halfway wet, and others maybe a third of the way. And so they're measuring the speed, but they never find out how much water a whole towel will hold. So that's kind of like capillary action. And I try to ask them, well, will you be able to wet the entire towel that way? And they say, well, probably not. So they need to figure out some way to wet the entire towel. So I try to discourage that kind by questions. Another group might want to cut the towels. They're bothered that the 3 towels I give them are different sizes. They're not that different, but they are different. And so I tell them if they were to cut them a certain size, and they usually want to cut them the size of the smallest towel. If they cut them that size, haven't they changed the question? And they'll realize that yes, they have changed, and I'll ask them what the question is that would be. And they say, well, that would be how much water will a towel this size hold when all others are at the same size? That's an important question, and I think manufacturers would be interested in the answer. But that is not the question we're pursuing today. So when you go to the paper towel roll to grab one, you don't cut it to make sure it's no bigger than some other towel. You grab a whole, regular towel. And so we're going to use whole towels, and remember, select the size you're using too. And that's what we'll use. I do allow one group to cut the towels. I'd rather y'all not do it at home, since we don't have as good a contact with you, but I do allow one group to cut it just to see what happens. And usually I have about eight or 10 groups in the class. So letting one group do that's not too bad. Now, another thing that they do, and this one, I've had a little bit of problem with this one, is some groups want to squeeze the towels. Now, if they wet the towel, let's suppose they put a bunch of water in a pan or a cup or something, and they wet the towel very much, it's soaked, and they've measured that water that they've used, and they pull the towel out and they squeeze the water back into the pan of water, they will not know how much they squeezed out. So one danger of letting them squeeze it is they might squeeze it back into the pan. So if they're going to squeeze, I say, okay, now I ask them, where would you squeeze it into? And they say, oh, a separate cup. And so you're going to catch it and measure it. And they go, yes. Okay, good. So if they squeeze that towel and they squeeze a certain amount out of it, they'll say that's how much we squeezed out. I usually ask them, was that water absorbed by the towel? And they go, yes. Okay, so it soaked up that much. Now, how much water is still left in the towel? And they'll look at me puzzled and they'll go, oh, we don't know. And so, or if they've measured how much they squeezed out and they subtract that from how much they started with, they can tell me how much is in the towel. So they have three numbers: what they started with, how much they squeezed out, and they calculate how much is still left in the towel. So I usually ask them, well, the water left in the towel was absorbed, right? And they go, yes. The water you squeezed out was absorbed, wasn't it? They go, yes. And then they realize they could add those two numbers together and they'll know how much the towel really absorbed. But then one of them will usually go, oh, we didn't need to squeeze it off. We're going to add them back together. We could have just pulled it out and measured how much was left and subtracted and known how much was in the towel. And they go, oh, so really there's no need to squeeze it. But if you do this face-to-face with students and you want to let one group squeeze it, that's fine, as long as they keep up with all their numbers. Okay, let's go forward, Judy, see if we got another, next slide. Okay. Now, if you have a question about your plan, we've asked you to send that plan to us. If you have a question, you can ask me or you can ask Judy. You can email us. You have our email addresses. You can ask us, okay? And I've already mentioned you're going to send your results to me if you're elementary. You're going to send them to Judy, and her email address starts out director if you're middle or high. Okay, let's go to the next slide, see the materials. Now, I don't want you using shop towels. Even if you're limited to those, see if you can borrow a towel or buy one somewhere. Shop towels are made to absorb a lot of oils and things like that. They're going to be a lot better than your normal kitchen type towels. So I do want you to use a kitchen type paper towel, not a cloth towel. I'm going to suggest you don't use Viva, because Viva is processed to this almost a cloth, and it's almost unfair. I mean, you can test Viva if you want. You're going to get really good absorbency for Viva. It's almost not fair. If you've got the wrapper, save it. We might use that later. But if you don't have the wrapper, let's don't get stressed about that and worry about it and go buy more towels. If you've got, some of you have the wrappers, and I have a few wrappers I'll show you of towels. I want to show you some math activities we can do beyond this later, which actually will reflect back on the what you've done in the inquiry and give you something really good to think about that you could do further experimentation. Now, you're going to have paper towel. You might have a measuring spoon set, or you might have a teaspoon or a tablespoon. Now, 1 teaspoon is 5 milliliters, and I like to talk in milliliters here when we talk about our amounts of absorbency. And if you have a partial teaspoon left over, you're going to have to estimate how much is left. But 1 teaspoon equals 5 milliliters. That's a level teaspoon. 1 tablespoon is equal to 3 teaspoons. So that would be 15 milliliters. And a 1/4 cup is 4 of those tablespoons. So that would be 60 milliliters.
And
So
Mandy,
yeah.
I just wanted to jump in case people didn't see it in the chat. Katie mentioned that if you have a child's medicine cup, or those spoon things, they usually do have milliliters on them. So that's an
That's
option.
great if they do. Yeah, that's
Well,
wonderful. I
Or the
hope,
syringes that they use for
Yeah.
medicine, children's medicine.
I hope you might have some, but not have to use them for what their main purpose. But yeah, if you got those little NyQuil things too, that might help also. Or medicine, or like Judy said, those little syringes. But and that would be good because we like to use milliliters here if we could. But if all else fails, you can use a regular old teaspoon and tablespoon or a set of measuring spoons. Now, if you try to pull out a cup of water, you make sure that's a level cup. It's hard to estimate a cup. You could be off 5 or 10 milliliters sometimes in trying to estimate a whole cup. So it might be better to use the smaller measures. I'm asking you to use 3 cups the same size. They can be paper, plastic, or ceramic coffee cups, or you can use more than 3 cups. As long as you have at least 3 cups available in case you want to put each towel in a different cup, you could do that. You might even have a 4th cup or some other pan to put water in. A ruler's handy to have. It is nice to know the sizes of the towels. And that square pan that I'm suggesting you get, it could be metal or aluminum pie pan or Pyrex or whatever. It's nice to have something like that, if you wanted to wet the towels in the pan, you could. I'm going to recommend one thing you might not do. If sometimes students want to make a spill. Sometimes they don't even measure it, so they're really starting off poorly there. But even if they measure their spill, they know how much they poured on the tabletop, and they put a towel in it, it's hard to know sometimes if the towel's completely wet, unless it's so wet that when you pick it up, it drips back onto the tabletop. Then you know it's pretty soaked. That's good. But then I asked them, well, how much water's left on the table? They have a hard time measuring that water that's left on the table. They can't really pour it off the table very well. It's hard to get it all off into something they can measure. So I'm recommending that if you put water in something where you're going to put the towel and wet it, that could be a cup, or it could be one of those pans that I suggested, rather than the tabletop, because you're going to have to measure how much you put in there and how much is left, and you're going to have to try to figure out how much is in the towel. Okay, so these are the materials that you will use, and plus those others we mentioned a minute ago. And before next Wednesday, we'd like for you to give us your results. I'd really like for you to email us the results by Tuesday so we'll have time to look at them. Because if you do it Wednesday morning, we'll be getting ready for the next Wednesday morning activity. So please send us your homework for this part by the end of the day next Tuesday. Late as you want to, as long as it's Tuesday is good. Okay, let's go to the next one, Judy. All right, so anybody got questions about procedures or materials or anything like that? Let's answer those questions now. Might save a lot of emailing later. Do that in the chat. Okay, got one person with no questions. We'll wait a little bit. Okay, some people are good to go. Good. Okay. Hopefully you can borrow some towels from some other folks and have more than one kind. Yeah, you're just doing, if you only got one type of towels at home, you're probably going to try one towel. Now, in a real scientific experiment, you would do multiples. You wouldn't just test one towel. You would run the test many times for replication, but we're going to just do one test now, so you could use one towel. I
And
missed
you
that
may
last.
need to go to your neighbors to get even a paper towel. So
Yep. You might borrow one. You can stay at a distance, safe distance, and ask them, or call them on the phone, ask them to put one out on the porch for you or something, and run get it. But it'd be nice to have, you need to know what kind it was, because we're going to ask you what kind it was. We need to know the name brand of the towel. Now, of course, we know Bounty has it on the towels, but hopefully they'll know their brand, even if it's not a Bounty.
and Bounty has different grades. It's not just amazing.
This is like a paper absorption lab. It is. And the information you're going to email to us, somebody's asked that, is we want you to tell us what kind of towel you had and how much water it absorbed. And I want to know the method that you used. So you'll say, I used, say, a Bounty. It absorbed 25 milliliters, and this is how I did the experiment. Somebody asked any experiment format, you're going to have to design the experiment format, and that's what you'll send to us, is your format. Other questions?
That the last bullet is what you need to send to us.
Yeah. Somebody last night, we did this workshop yesterday, and they asked about dripping. And I told them, I said, you're going to have to decide. That's something you have to weigh out in your design and decide. You might decide you want to wet the towel, so you might ball it up, or you might fold it. You might figure out, I can fold, if I had multiple towels, I could fold them all the same better than I could ball them up the same. So you might just have to make a decision there. And then when I decide I've wet the towel some way, I put a certain quantity of water on it to make sure it's totally soaked. And believe me, totally soaking is good. Some students like to add 10 milliliters at a time, and they find out they have to keep adding 10, adding 10, adding 10. And so it might be good just to soak it. Okay, it's now soaked, and you're going to take it out of that water that you measured. You have to decide, are you going to let it drip until it stops? Are you going to let it drip 10 seconds? Or are you going to just take it out, maybe let it, see if it dripped, and then put it in another pan right away and then measure what's left? You'll have to decide which way you want to do that. That leads some students from wanting to squeeze it. That's why I mentioned squeezing earlier. So we're trying to discourage that. But so there are decisions you're going to have to make. How you put the towel in, how you wet it, how much water you use, how you take it out, if you let it drip or not. A lot of decisions. And you're going to try to control the experiment. Yeah, thanks, Teresa, for sending that type of towel, the details of your method and the amount of water absorbed. And I hope that some of you can get multiple towels. It'd be nice if you could get 3 different kinds. Now, if I only had 25 students, we could almost do this with you because this group's small. The group was big yesterday. If I had 25 students, I would put them in breakout groups on Zoom, and I would choose them by the type towel. I'd ask them in advance to tell me the kind of towels they had. I did this last week with my college class, and they told me the kind of towels they had. And like one student had a Bounty, and another one had a Great Value from Walmart, and another one had something from Food Lion. And so I put those 3 students together in a team, and I did a breakout room, and every one of my breakout rooms had 3 students, each with a different kind of towel. And so you could do that, and then they could have a chance to discuss their method. And although they're at different homes separated some distance, they could all try that method, so that lab group would have a specific method that they would use. And then they can make a good comparison of their results. And then each lab group might do something slightly different, but within their group, they would do it the same. So that's how you would do this if you were doing this. I have all this written up that we'll give you, but that's how you would do that if you had like 25 students and you want them to do this at home and they only had 1 towel each. Any other questions? All right, Judy, I think I've used all my time too.
Well, this is.
Yeah, these are. Yeah, this is the next 2 slides. I'm going to plant a seed here for session 3 next week. These are some good questions to ask as students are doing their research or as they're doing a lab or any type of inquiry. And I know a lot of times we ask questions that are recall, and I ask students what they hate about school, and they hate memorization. And a lot of questions we ask are memorization, and I do know that we have to have them remembering some things, but we also could ask questions like this more often and get them to think. So I'm going to come back to this slide in session 3, and the next slide, I want to plant a seed there. It's not going forward. Okay, there we go. Now, just begin thinking about this. You've heard how we're going to do this lab that you're going to do between now and next week. And I want you to think about how you might redesign some of the activities you currently do so they're more inquiry-based with your students. So we'll come back to this slide next in session 3. I want you to be prepared to share some ideas for activities you currently do that you might be able to adapt to be more inquiry-based, more guided instead of structured. Thank you, Judy.
Okay. All right. So I told you that we're going to have you design a project. And so these are what we're going to be having you look at. First of all, we're going to talk about a topic, and then at part of your homework, you will be deciding upon a topic. We're going to have you think about background research resources I'm not going to make you actually do all the background research, but I do want you to come up with some of those ideas of where you would go. And unfortunately, since students are not in school and the libraries are closed, a lot of them resources will be going to the internet, and that's something that we'll have to look out for. We'll talk about that in a minute, and maybe other places to get information. We'll have you create a research plan and what that will involve. The research plan will be really covering next week, but for this coming week, we'll be looking at that topic, background research, and testable question for you to do. And one of the things that we need to be keeping in our minds all the time are any special safety issues or special permissions that might be needed for the research that you're planning on doing. Okay, so let's looking at planning a scientific inquiry project more so than the engineering. I think picking the topic is the most difficult thing that students do. And it's when they come up with a topic, sometimes I'll have people that will come up and it's a whole long sentence or multiple sentences. And I'm saying, no, we need to refine that. It needs to be a little more specific about what it is that you are interested in, and just a couple of words. And then once you do your background research, you're going to go in, learn more about it, and refine what you want to do. But you need to know kind of what you want to start thinking about from the beginning. And when students are trying to think of a topic, if they can come up with something that they are already interested in, and I mentioned this before in the first session, whether it's a hobby or a topic or something that they know something about, they need to try to come up eventually with a question or a problem that they've encountered or they know about, or maybe they don't know the answer to, but something that is related to that specific area. Encourage students to think about their environment. Think about things that they do in their life, their activities. What do you like to do when you get out of school? What do you, in your spare time? What do you do with your friends? Is there something particular that you've read about in the news that is really concerning you or that you are interested in? Do you know someone who has, so thinking about real world applications or something that they have a specific desire to learn more about or to answer or to figure out. Journaling is, I've already talked about this a little bit. I'm going to stress it again. Journaling is extremely important, and it is best done if it's in like a bound book or a bound notebook instead of doing it online. Our students are so used to doing all their writing on computers but this is something they need to be able to add materials like taping in a picture. Well, I know we can add pictures to online things, but it needs to be something that can't be edited. And when you're doing a computer, a Word file or something else, you can go in and change it so it looks like you're doing really, really good. But you need to keep all the mistakes in there as well as the things that worked, so that when you go back later, you can see, maybe this was where the problem is, or maybe this is where something happened. And if you're doing scientific research as a engineer or as a scientist, you're going to end up needing to be able to have that recording that other people can verify for you. So keeping that log is really important. If students have that deer in the headlight look, they kind of go, I can't think of anything. What am I supposed to do? Give me a topic, assign me something. Science Buddies does have something called the Topic Wizard that can help them figure out what it is that they are interested in. And that ask a lot of questions, and then it comes back after they've answered the questions and says, okay, based on your responses, these are the things that it sounds like you are interested in. Now, that's great, and I like that, but then it goes on and gives them experiments for each of those things. That's when you get into the issue of whether it's going to be a verification experiment or whether it's going to be their own. If they can always do that experiment as background research, and if they do that, then it needs to be listed in their bibliography as one of their resources. And then they need to ask a different question about that. But this is what I did with the Science Buddies activity, but I changed the question, and I'm testing this instead to see how it reacts, which is different. And it can't be the way I got one year from a student that they were doing an oil spill, and the difference between her project and the other project is she used Petri dishes instead of beakers. Now, that's not really changing the question. That's changing your equipment, but that doesn't count. It has to be more than that along the way. So that's something to remember if they go to Science Buddies to get their topic. If you're having them do it for your class, again, you can go back and look at different areas that you need to cover during the school year. And it's not really guided, but it is kind of where you're suggesting these are topics that we want to cover. What is in there that is of interest to you? Which one would you like to work on and during research if you're using it to be able to help you cover the curriculum that you need to cover for the year? And that's perfectly acceptable. But I would still make sure that they do everything in that process, and that they're following the safety issues, and that it is an original question, and they're developing their own process along the way. And then if it is something that's really good, they're eligible to be able to send that on to competitions. And I always like to have that as an option for students. So looking at background research, we've gotten our topic. We know what we want to work on. And I'm going to go ahead and start talking about plants because that's something that I'm interested in. And lo and behold, there are not a lot of safety issues if you work with plants. So that makes it really easy that I don't have to get special permissions because I can not water plants and they die and nobody gets mad at me, unlike if I, just mistreat my fish and they all die, then that's an issue. So thinking about what the safety issues are and things you have to think about is important. So when you're doing that background research, you need to be looking so you get more information about that topic, or if you're doing engineering, the problem that you selected that you want to work out. While you're doing that, you're going to come across different terms that the student may not be familiar with. So this is the time that as they're increasing their knowledge base about that topic, they're learning more about the definition of it or explanation of terms and about things that happen with it and things that you can manipulate, what we know, and it helps them come up with information about what we don't know. And that's where they are going to be developing that question is, what do we not know? And we want to try to steer them away from verification labs as much as possible. I know I was helping out one of the regional fairs one year, and I got in going to the regional fair, which means they were promoted from the school level to the regional fair. There were 5 different strawberry DNA labs. Now, pretty much if you've worked with DNA, you know that you can squirt Dawn detergent into a mixture of strawberries that you've mashed up in water, and lo and behold, you can spool the DNA in a glass rod. So that's a verification experiment. That's not something that's really suitable to going on to a competition. It needs to be something we don't know the answer to. That's why I go back to the Science Buddies. If it tells you what to do, then we already know what's going to happen, and they need to ask different questions that we don't know the answer to already. So getting that information, that background research is really important. So going to the internet, which is what they're going to be doing, encourage Google Scholar. They're going to have more reliable data coming from there. They can go to the .edu sites or the .gov sites, and those both give you more reliable data. When you go to the .coms and the .orgs, very often you get someone's opinion or their philosophy of something instead of whether or not this is actually accurate information. But a source that often goes untapped is looking about people that are out there that can be interviewed and along the way. We have all the wildlife agents that are out there that are love to work with students, be able to answer questions. We have the ag extension people that come out of NC State that are in every single county. And there are other groups, people like that, that are available that you can ask questions to. I had years ago a young man who was looking at electric batteries and creating storage for electric batteries. And he actually, one of his expert witnesses or people that he went to as a source was a mechanic at the Toyota dealer, and this was years ago, at the Toyota dealership that specialized in the working on the electric version of the cars and the batteries that were in those and how those were developed and how they worked. So there are experts out there that we don't always think about and try to take advantage of them. And this is another good option when you're looking at parental support. Are there any people that work in a particular area that would be a resource? If students are doing a project with animals, if you can get someone who is a veterinarian, if you've got people that want to do human experiments, then you're gonna need somebody who has background in either the medical field or psychology or psychiatry or social work to be able to sign off on those projects, to be able to approve them before they go forward. So that's information, and they can also ask them questions. So think about those when they're looking at that background research. One of the things they might want to look at is, why is this question important? Why do I want to know the answer to it? What's the real world application of it? What we require when we're looking at projects that come to the regional level and to the state level for competitions, and I really encourage you to require this in your classrooms as well, of having a minimum number of references. We let the elementary students get off easy with a minimum of only 3. And we let the middle and high school get away with 5 references. And you say, 5 references? Gosh, where will they ever come up with that? If they're really interested in something, it's pretty easy to find those. Now, one of the things that I haven't mentioned is not a great reference, and it's one that I see all the time, is Wikipedia. Wikipedia, anybody can put information in that. So that is not one of the ones that they want to use. There may be some information in there that they think is great, that's valid, but they need to find a source that is a little bit more reliable, where it can't be changed and added by people who really have opinions instead of knowledge along the way. So, look for other sources. If they use the internet, they've got to give the full reference as to where it is coming from.
So Judy, I just want to give you a heads up. We just have 5 minutes left.
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. Moving onward. Okay. So creating a testable question in 5 minutes is going to be real fast. All right. So moving onward with this, a testable question is actually your whole experiment. So it needs to be a fair test, and you're going to have in there what your topic is, what's being changed or tested, and what's being measured. So I'm going to go quickly into this. This is a sheet that we will send to you, and it's a great worksheet that was given to me by Nancy Bray many, many years ago. She's in the northeastern part of North Carolina and used to be one of my co-directors a long, long time ago. But she's been active in science education. There are other versions of this same form out there that you may see. This is one that's just real easy that I have the rights to be able to share. And so that's why we use it. So I've got step by step. I'm going to work on plants as my topic. And then I'm going to start brainstorming. For the rest of the sheet is brainstorming. So what materials are readily available for conducting experiments? Ordinarily, if I had time, I would ask you, and we would have I've got preformed answers in that, but I would like to get your opinion. But since I've only got a couple minutes, I'm going to go in and tell you. I came up with some of my materials that I could use are soil, Food would be a fertilizer. I would be looking at water. Light actually is one of the things that I would need to be considering and working with plants, and temperature and are the same, because if they do photosynthesis, we have to have water and we have to have light, and they also have to be within a certain temperature range that they will work. So how does a plant act? I've got two different things in here. They grow and they flower. Growing is not very specific. They grow and they have all kinds of trophisms that I could be testing depending upon what level of student that I was. Growing the roots, shoots, whatever. As I continue onward, I'm still kind of brainstorming of how can I change the set of plant materials to affect one of those actions. So I can think about, all right, I'm going to choose the plant material of water, and I'm going to look at the effect of different kinds of water and how that would affect I'm going to look at how it flowers, and that would be my action. So my question, so on number 4, can I measure or describe the response of the material to the change? So I'm going to look at water, the time. I have to have a measurement in there. So I'm going to look at changing water, and I'm going to measure the time that it takes for the plant to flower. So that gets me down to, does filtered water, tap water, or rainwater help the plants flower faster? So that's my testable question. If you look at that, it's got my topic, it's got, I'm working on plants, what is being changed or tested, it's the 3 different kinds of water, and what is being measured, the time it takes for the plant to flower. Now, looking at that testable question, there's my experiment. So now I would be going to my research plan and looking at the materials that I would need to be able to do that. And as I'm creating my research plan, I would think, I can only change one variable at a time. So the only variable I'm going to change is the kind of water. And as I'm changing the water that I'm treating the plants, I'm going to have the same kind of plant, preferably from the same bag of seeds. So they're as close to being the same everything as possible. They're going to have the same amount of light, the same amount of fertilizer, kept at the same temperature in the same soil. Everything that I mentioned in question 1 about all those materials has to stay constant along the way. And as I continue developing this, I would look at any safety issues that I have and develop that. So we're going to be talking about research plans and how to put all this together at the next session. But right now, for next week, you've got some homework assignments, and your homework assignments are sending the methods and the data that you've collected for the paper towel absorbency experiment. You have to come up with a topic that you would do for a science research project. You have to come up with a testable question, and we'll send you that 4-question sheet that you can then have a copy of it, that you can run off a copy, that you can use it as your worksheet, and you can use it with your students. And when you finish that and coming up with that testable question, you're going to send that, if you're an elementary teacher, send that to Manly. And if you're a middle or high school teacher, you're going to send it to me. And if you are an administrator, you can choose either one, but we just ask that you consistently, as we give you assignments next week, send that to the same person you sent the first one to, so that we'll be able to have a follow-up with you and be able to do that. So that is the assignment. Let's go back again and get that on here. And we've got a couple of minutes, or maybe we don't have a couple of minutes. I think it's in a time, but we can hang on as long as you want to if you have questions. Manly, anything that you'd like to add, or Teresa?
No, I'm fine. We'll stay here for questions because we go till noon anyway. So we can stay for questions.
Yep.
Right. I think we had said 50 minutes, but
50 minutes.
We also,
yes.
also said till noon. So we're available.
Great. And so thank you, everybody. If you don't have questions, you are welcome to log off now. I did just send out that follow-up email, so you should have an email from me. If you don't, I used your email address from the sign-in, so just reach out to me and I will make sure you get that information that you need to do your homework. And I'm going to stop the recording now.